Welcome to Soundstage Insider, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the film and television industry. We're bringing you the visionary directors and producers, the talented cinematographers, editors, sound designers, and more who really make the magic happen. We delve deep into their stories, their struggles, and their triumphs. So let's go beyond the red carpet and discover a fascinating world of behind-the-scenes talent. Hello, welcome to the Soundstage Insider podcast. Now, I've had some feedback that suggests I should shorten these intros, so I am going to do that. I am nothing if not responsive to feedback. So we're going to get straight into it today. Going to give you a short bio of our guest and then get straight into the interview. Jim Frohna is an acclaimed film and television cinematographer renowned for his exceptional visual storytelling skills. Throughout his career, Frohna has collaborated with numerous talented directors, producers, and fellow cinematographers, creating a diverse portfolio of work that showcases his versatility and artistic vision. From television series such as Big Little Lies, Transparent, I Love Dick, and Apple TV Plus's Shrinking, to independent films Afternoon Delight, Breakpoint, and many more, his cinematography has consistently elevated storytelling, evoking emotion and immersing audiences in captivating visual landscapes. I started the interview by asking Jim if he remembers what his first impression was of cinematography and cinematographers.
That's a very interesting first question. I mean, I always loved movies and stories and was always, as a kid, taken away to those magical places very easily and very quickly and got, I was known as the sensitive one in my family and one of 7 kids. And we would go to the movies and my, 3 older brothers would look over at certain points and see if I had my hands up on either side of my head. That meant I was tearing up and didn't want anyone to see that I was feeling things. Yeah. And then they would, tease me relentlessly about that. But I can say that I have so many memories of that kind of experience of just being transported from movies and even watching, stuff at home, whether it was a show or a movie. And I can also share that as a younger adult or even a teenager, when I, first picked up my mom's little Kodak Instamatic camera that, just had a little click button and a flash, that I would sometimes take that around the neighborhood and just notice. It's funny because I can look back at photos from that period and see how I loved the way that, light coming through a window looked, or the way that a building on one side of the street that had windows would reflect the sunlight and all these kind of specular patterns on the building across the street from it. And I would take a picture of that. So it was fun to see decades later, because my path to becoming a cinematographer was not a straight one. I mean, I went to film school, and like everybody there, I was going to be a director and, a writer. And I actually came out of film school writing screenplays. And I happened to have a friend of mine who was starting to get into film production on the lighting side. And we started writing together. And he said, why don't I try and get you on the lighting crew? So that way we have the same work schedule and then we can, have the same writing schedule. Right. So I did that for a handful of years out of film school. And I found that I very quickly took to lighting and loved it and rose very quickly through the ranks to become a gaffer. And it was only after a few years of that I started looking over to the camera department and thinking that I know that's a fun job, being a DP. It's super creative. And, I could tell stories for a while, but the short version is I was in the commercial world as a gaffer, always aching to do narrative. And I worked with this filmmaker named Mike Mills, who had done some commercials and then was doing short films, doing features. And I was on Mike's crew for 6 or 7 years as a gaffer. And then along came this documentary project, and he said, Jim, will you come to Japan and film this with me? And that was my first official entry into becoming a DP. And I had such an incredible experience doing that film with Mike. And then other directors heard that I was starting to shoot. And again, I was very fortunate in that my DP career took off very quickly. And then it was just a matter of, now how do I get into the storytelling? Because that's my truest love, is to be a key, creative part of the team that brings the story to life.
Right.
And so, eventually I got, lucky and got into narrative. And again, it's just been a joyful journey filled with, lots of great stories and lots of great life experiences and lots of nice credits.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting because as you were describing your early years and you were talking about how you would see light through a window and things like that, I was thinking your motivation was more from an artistic perspective, a visual artistic perspective, but you're saying it's more of a storytelling, or is it a combination of the two? Or
I definitely, yes, it's definitely a combination. I mean, again, to this day, I'm still kind of where I lean in terms of the way that I shoot things. And obviously I can do a few different styles, but the main thing that I'm known for is this very naturalistic kind of grounded, where it feels like real life, or like light is coming through a window the way light feels in, your apartment or your house, even if we're on the soundstage. So it's definitely the combination of that. And then, wanting to be, like I said, just there in the room, working with actors and helping be the conduit or the emotion for the journey that the audience is going to take.
You talk about your visual style. Is that something that has occurred naturally over time? Is it something that is a product of particular influences? How would you say you've developed that?
I think that I was always, so there was a DP named Harris Savitas who shot most of Gus Van Sant's early stuff.
Wow.
And like one movie that, most people know is Good Will Hunting.
Yeah.
That Harris shot and that Gus Van Sant directed. And the way that there was an emotional quality, there was a very human quality. Not everything was perfect and slick. There was this lived in feeling, just, I'll use the word and it'll probably come up a lot as we talk, but like a very kind of human or humanistic, a lot of tenderness for the human, character in his cinematography. He died pretty young. He died shortly after that movie, in fact. But that was, I think as I was, a younger moviegoer, and as I started becoming a DP, I realized that there was something in me. I wish, one, it'd be great if someday I can, have work that is as fine and full of feeling as Harris Savitas' work, but also it just suited my personality, just how I view the world, I think, and and the kind of lighting and, that I'm not the DP who is shooting the kind of slick thriller. I want to work on a human scale. That's where I think my skills and gifts work best, on the human scale.
Yeah, and you've discovered that through the process of doing it, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So as we work towards the kind of work that you do now and where you are in your career right now, I'd like to hear a little more about your early projects, your first few projects that you were doing as a DP. What were they like? Was it a nerve-wracking experience? Did you feel prepared? What was that like?
Right. Well, I have a good story about the very first narrative project. I mean, because the thing with Mike that I mentioned with Mike Mills was a documentary, and then the DP work that I got from that was still in the commercial realm. While I was, I had an agent, and I said, I really want to do a feature. I really want to do a feature. This is before streaming kind of exploded. And, I kept hearing, well, you've never shot a feature, so this or that director or producer is reluctant to, hire you because you haven't done one. And I was very fortunate that there's a visionary at the time, TV writer and director named Joey Soloway, who had a feature, and something already existed even in my commercial work in terms of, I was doing a lot of kind of like more grounded lifestyle vignette, kind of real people stuff. Mm-hmm. Joey saw something in my work, and I got an interview with Joey and was at long last hired to, do this feature called Afternoon Delight, starring Catherine Hahn and Juno Temple. Oh. And the producers, after, Joey had met with me and a few other DPs, and Joey talked about how much they wanted to work with me, the producers were very nervous and said, but you haven't directed a feature before, Joey, and Jim hasn't directed, DP'd a film before. We're nervous. And so the producers persuaded Joey to not hire me, even though Joey and I had this instant connection. And that was the summer of 2012, right? At the beginning of the summer, Joey and I met, and they were going to film in August. 3 or 4 days before principal photography on that independent feature started, Joey called me and said that the DP that they hired dropped out, and was I still available? And it was such a funny experience, Jamie, because when we met, it really was this creative sparks were flying. And there was this, we were speaking the same language from this very first lunch meeting. And even when Joey had called me to say it wasn't going to happen earlier that summer, there was some feeling like we're not done. We're not done with this potential, creative relationship yet. And Joey calls. And so 3 days later, there was DPing my very first feature.
Wow.
Which went on to Sundance, and Joey won the Best Directing Award that year. And then the following year, Joey had been writing a project based on what was going on in their family, and it became the TV show Transparent. I don't know.
Oh, yes, of course.
So that relationship that almost didn't happen, that then happened with Joey's movie, has been this incredible, fruitful, really powerful collaboration that has shaped me not only in my DP career, but as a human being. Because we went on to do, 5 seasons of Transparent, and then this show called I Love Dick. So this, this one thing, this tenuous little moment of, oh, this is going to be the first feature, and then it goes away, and then it comes back, ended up, blossoming into this really, and again, it's like Transparent was at the very beginning of streaming. It was at the very beginning of broader awareness culturally of, oh, there's this whole community of people that have always existed, and, but bringing their stories to the forefront. And so it was just sort of amazing that was I was basically a new DP in terms of narrative when Transparent began.
Yeah. So really, thanks to that guy for pulling out.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Do you know who it is? Do you owe him a drink or something?
I do know who it is. And I over the years, I've thought about, saying something, but again, people make their choices.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you think only having 3 days was probably a good thing? So you didn't necessarily start panicking or overthinking it, or would you prefer more time?
When I think back on that, it was just this thrill ride. It's like, oh yeah, you're ready to go? Here we go, man. Like the ride is shooting out of the gate, if it's a e-ticket ride, roller coaster, whatever, there's no time. And so it was just like going right away on instinct and, feeling the kind of electric charge of collaborating and getting in there with the actors. And so, it is funny because I didn't know anything. So I had never experienced what was supposed to happen. Prepping for a feature. And, luckily that the movie took place mostly in the house of the main character. And, so of our 23 days of filming, we were probably there, 14 days. So we kind of got to land there first and sort of figure our way towards the world of the story and how to tell it.
Right.
But it was an incredible summer.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. Sometimes just being thrown in the deep end is kind of the best way to get started with something, yes. Right? Don't think about it too much.
Yeah.
So let's move on more to the present day now. When all the things that you've learned over the years, all the projects that you've worked on, when you're in talks to work on a new project, what are the kind of things that you're looking for out of the project or out of the collaborators that you work with? What questions do you have going into that process?
I typically meet, the creative, like when we're talking about TV. I guess it's also true for some of that in the feature world, but I've done the majority of my career has been in TV thus far. And I will ask the creator, showrunner, this is before maybe I'm even meeting who's going to be directing. One of the questions I end up asking is, why do you want to tell this story? And I'm there, again, my way in so often is on an emotional level. Like if I understand what the emotional journey of the character or characters is and what the kind of feeling space that the filmmaker wants, the show creator or showrunner wants, then the things start to appear to me, in terms of the visuals, style, the feeling, the lensing. So having that kind of conversation, as opposed to it being about it's rarely first about anything technical or, like how many shoot days are we going to have or who the cast is, whatever. It's like, I want to kind of understand that what is driving them to tell the story. And, when I'm then working with the directors who are going to do the pilot or what have you, we end up talking so much about the stuff around the story, again, kind of the ways that we relate to the characters or personal life experiences. And then from that starts to build this one, it builds a connection with the other person, but also then that kind of starts to translate as we talk about, like in the case of Shrinking, for example, this is a story that has moments of high comedy or physical comedy and silliness, but also a lot of pathos and pain and human suffering, right? The death of a loved one, the death of a mother, the death of a spouse. And so in that case, James Ponsoldt, who was one of the producers and directed the pilot as well as a few other episodes, and I would just talk about wanting to honor that, to let the camera kind of be there as a witness, we'll say, to what has happened to this family, to what has happened to Jason Segel's character. And essentially, their conversations that, I guess, to answer your question, is they start, again, from that kind of emotional place and then build towards language of how we're going to tell that story.
It's fascinating to me hearing about the level of collaboration between the producers, the showrunners, the director, the DOPs. It strikes me that you as the cinematographer have such an influence over the finished product, Can you talk about how much your creativity within that process influences and, you sort of bounce off ideas with all the other people, the collaborators at that level? From an outside perspective, it's sort of a mystery how these things come to be,
Right. Well, the first thing that came to mind as you were asking the question is to, go back to the days of Transparent, and when both on the indie feature I mentioned, Afternoon Delight with Joey, and then the early days of Transparent, we actually were influenced a lot by Andrea Arnold. I don't know if you know her work, but the movie Fish Tank really inspired us. And there's something in that again, I connected to both creatively and also as a human being in terms of this style that had pretty much all handheld camera and that you felt like you were just there in the room. So as Joey and I were building our own language for Transparent, we were saying, like, we started this idea, I started trying to like find inspiration based on Andrea Arnold's style of filmmaking. How do we make it how do we find our own version of that? And one thing that I discovered and had no idea prior is that I was really great at handheld camera work. And so in terms of like, you're asking like how much does my creativity influence, or what I bring influence the end result? In that case, Joey wanted handheld. And then it turned out that, again, it's like, I'm not an athletic person. I can't play sports. I'm totally uncoordinated in real life. But when I have a camera on my shoulder, I can kind of float around and like, bob and weave, and I'm, moving around.
So what is great at handheld cam? What does that mean exactly?
Well, I guess what I'm describing is you can put me in a room with actors and I don't have to know what's going to happen. And I somehow manage to land the camera at the right time, or like find a gesture that an actor is making maybe after they think the camera's off them. But like my instincts to follow, the feeling and follow the scene work.
Which comes back to that emotional thing, probably that emotional.
Yes. Yeah. There are so many times I'm watching a show or I'm watching a movie and I think, this looks so great. I don't know how this DP does this. I could never do that. And it used to kind of bug me like, oh, does that mean, I'm not good enough, or I don't know, but I've come to grow, into myself and realize like where my strengths are. And it's in this world, following my intuition, working in a very, like I've said already, that naturalistic way. But so this allowed, what this meant for Transparent particularly is that we weren't setting marks for the actors. Like that's a big part of, typically how you execute a scene, right? It's like the actor's going to stand in the doorway, then they're going to move to this position, then they're going to sit down here, and they're going to stand up here. With our working style that we started playing around with and loving is like the actors could just be in the space. They didn't have to do the same thing each time. They could just exist in this room that we're in together. And I would just follow the feeling, follow the scene. And so that became very integral to the way that Transparent felt and looked, right? It's like we wanted, again, that feeling of this thing is unfolding in real time in front of us. It means that sometimes things were missed, or the focus was a little soft, or, the shot wasn't perfect, but I've now worked with a lot of the same camera crew and have kind of instilled in them the same ideas. So I don't always have to be the one holding the camera.
Yeah.
Where I'm not looking for perfection. I'm looking for connection, like just be present, be open your heart. As sometimes I jokingly say to my camera operators, like, open your heart and close your mouth. Like, just be present with the camera and things will reveal themselves. It's a really amazing process.
And I guess that is also opening that opportunity for capturing that lightning in a bottle moment that you can't write on a script. You can't prepare. You can't do over and over, take in, take out.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The happy accidents. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love that. I actually remember I was reading an interview that you did. I think it was for Big Little Lies, and you were talking about that process. And it struck me that actors must love that. I can imagine that they really appreciate that.
Yes.
And, you helping them and everyone, it's sort of a miracle to me that movies happen, that everyone has to be able to do their job, and film, TV, everything is such a collaborative, complicated process.
Yes.
That you doing your job really well helps the actors do their job really well, which helps the sound and later on the editors and
Yeah.
So I can imagine how that process is great.
Yes. No, you're right. It's a very elaborate dance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your team. Is your responsibility finding your team then for each project that comes up? And then what is your process for finding those people? What are the criteria that you look for?
Yeah. So I will hire the camera operators, and I will be in conversation with who's going to be the primary focus pullers on those two. It's typically two cameras, right? In TV especially. But as far as the rest of the camera crew, they will then be hired by, those leading people. Like typically the first AC will hire the second AC and other folks. And
right.
And then there's also the position of a DIT, the digital image technician, who helps manage and, on set. I don't know how deep you want to go into like what that person does, but they're there with a monitor where sometimes one camera doesn't quite match another camera, or since we use vintage lenses so often now these days, sometimes the lenses are slightly different. So that person is sort of doing the simplistic way of thinking of it is like, it's like Photoshop on the fly. Or if I know that, I'm going to eventually want this mood to be darker than it looks in the room, whether it's because of bright walls or whatever, like the DIT will help shape the image with me live right there. And then that's the look that gets sent to the dailies that then gets sent to editorial.
And is that baked in for the editor later, or is that like a lot?
The short answer is it's not baked in. So there could be a process, or, depending on who your producers or showrunners are, they may say, some showrunners are like, we completely leave the visuals in your hands, and the look that you want is the look that stays throughout the whole thing. And then some will get to the post-production process and say like, oh, we want the colors much richer. Like we imagine this scene or this episode or this character's world to be, bolder colors than what, was given to them through the look that I set. And so then, there's ways to undo or redo or,
right,
variations on the theme that can happen. But, and you asked, what do I look for? One thing that I'll say has started, I felt it started to shift in our business in the last few years, maybe particularly since the pandemic. There's less and less tolerance for assholes or, for difficult pain in the ass people.
Yeah.
And another way to say it is like, there are so many people who can do a good job that I'm looking for somebody who is kind, who has good positive energy, because we're going to be working on set with each other for 10, 12, sometimes longer hours a day.
Yeah.
You want to be surrounded by people who come with that positivity. And again, it's like, it's hard work. And some days you're not going to be in a good mood, or, things are going to be tense sometimes. But as a foundation, it's like, let's all be together and watch out for each other because of this elaborate dance, because we are going to be busting our asses and keeping each other safe, keeping each other, even just being emotionally supportive of each other. So I look for people who are, kind human beings and who do their job well.
And presumably have that emotional sensibility as well, or sensitivity, should I say?
Yes, I mean, particularly with operators, yes, absolutely. And then, I also hire the gaffer who's the head of lighting, and the key grip who assists with all the camera movement and also with the lighting as well. So I hire those people, and then they hire their crew.
And you mentioned focus pulling. Can you tell me a little bit about what that role is and the importance of that role?
Yeah. So, back in the day of film cameras, before all the digital and wireless stuff took over, a focus puller would be right next to the camera, and the focus knob was on the camera. And so whoever was operating the camera would have this other person right next to them, and that person was 2 feet or 3 feet or whatever from the actors. So that means a couple of things. One, they have to be very good at their job, because it's a very, very challenging thing. If somebody sits back even 3 inches, like, you got to ride the focus wheel, or they stand up or sit down or they do something unexpected. You're this kind of silent magician, like, keeping everything in focus. It's a very, very critical job. But the other thing is who they are energetically when they're that close to the actor also matters, right? Hear actors saying, like, they feel like that those people right there at the camera are their first audience, right? Or like, and they can feel what's like there is an exchange of energy between who's behind the camera and who's on camera. So it's not just the skill of riding the focus wheel, but it's also that kind of people with a certain personality. The actors can feel their support, or their, that they are with them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then, one thing that, because of more than half of my work, a good amount of the shows are handheld shows. Again, with that spontaneous thing I was talking about earlier, the people that I hire also have this kind of extra sensory ability. Like, there's this woman, Faith Brewer, and I've worked with her on and off for over 10 years. And oftentimes, she's so good at her job, she's sometimes not available for my projects, but I always call her first, because she is, besides being this person with a tremendously huge heart and great sense of humor, is one of the most skilled ACs, focus pullers that I've ever met, and just has this, it's almost like she knows where I'm going to go with the camera before I even know.
Yeah.
And it's this thing where, and they're very like the unsung hero kind of thing, because no one's really thinking about that. They're watching this incredible performance by the actor, or they're seeing what the camera's doing, but they're not thinking, like, somebody is keeping this image, in focus for this entire, again, in our digital world now, a take can go for 20 minutes, which again, the actors love, and it brings a certain vitality to the filming, but it is definitely tough on the technicians. But that person who's the focus puller is riding that thing for that entire time. And it's a remarkable, the people who can do it well are, I think, little wizards.
Yeah. You don't hear a lot about them. Maybe I'll do an episode just on them.
Oh yeah.
Interesting to hear what they have to say.
Yeah. Oh, but the one thing I want to say about their job too is, like, nowadays with digital and wireless, they're now in front of a monitor, not the camera, which both means that they miss out, I think, emotionally or, creatively, they miss out being in the room. But it also means that their job is almost harder, because to feel that kind of connectivity between the operator and the focus puller, but yet they're 25 feet away. Now they're looking at their monitor, and
you couldn't get him a pair of like VR goggles and stand next to them, like camera guy.
I wonder if there's still some older focus pullers who are like, I'm going to do it the way I know.
Yeah, on the camera. You mentioned earlier that you use a lot of vintage lenses and things like that. So that sounds like that's a thing that's in vogue right now, using vintage lenses?
Yes. So as digital came onto the scene, and, for a while cameras were 2K, and then they were 3.5K, and then 4K, and now you can get an 8K camera, and who knows where the Ks are going to, that means more and more sensitivity, and bigger sensors to capture the image. One thing that a lot of DPs, I'm definitely, it's happened across the industry, where a lot of these cameras were so sharp and so clean because they were these digital machines, that people started seeking out older vintage lenses to add some aberrations or some flaws or just have some character and some feeling to the image. And that brought about this whole kind of renaissance. I mean, there were like dusty old lenses that were in the back of a room at, Panavision Hollywood, for example. And this amazing man named Guy McVicker, found this box of old lenses that were from pre-World War II and like scoured the world to find like if it was missing some of the lens, like if you had a 40 mil lens, but you needed a 65 millimeter, he scoured around the world to like find these old lenses and then rebuilt them. And now, they're available. So, and again, that's just one example where it became this opening up of all these new potential paintbrushes that DPs could use to tell the story, that you weren't limited to just new lenses that fit these cameras. Like they figured out how to rebuild old lenses to fit new cameras. And it just opened up a whole playground of, what you have available to choose from as you're finding your way towards what the look of a project wants to be.
Yeah. Do you think something has been lost with the transition to digital, or has the lens recalibrated the whole like that hyper clarity? Because as soon as I get a new TV and that setting that makes everything look way too sharp, I'm like, I can't wait to get rid of that.
So I don't know who to talk to. I've actually thought about this. Like there are other things in life to worry about, but when I go to a friend's house and that's how they watch TV, and not even my work, I don't care about that, but just like everything looks like a soap opera. It's dreadful setting. No, it's horrifying. It's horrifying. I mean, I've seen like great movies that ended up looking like, plastic telenovelas. I don't know, man. But as far as, there are still filmmakers who insist on film. There are projects both in the feature world and TV that shoot on film. Euphoria, for example, on HBO, that still, they shoot film. And I'm so glad about that, for one thing, that there are still people who advocate and push for that. There are many, many benefits to digital. Like I said, the way that I'm describing that we shot transparent would not necessarily be possible with film because of letting scenes unfold or just, starting over and going back, to the beginning of the scene, but the camera can keep rolling. And there are trade-offs. Again, it's like, it's not easy to carry a camera for 25 minutes, but there's something that you gain from this, again, with the example of transparent, having that living, breathing thing happening. And yes, the lenses do help. It's funny though, and this happens probably 3 times a year where maybe I'll look at an old project of mine, or I'll just be looking through images, stills from various projects that I've shot pre-digital and post. And anytime an image comes up, and I'm not thinking about it, but an image comes up that's filmed, there's just something that grabs me that I respond to, that lights me up or connects me in a way that I don't get from digital. I'm so used to digital now that there's ways to feel that in its own way, I suppose. I don't know, but it's funny. It's like anytime I think that, we're okay because we that we don't shoot on film anymore, and then I'll just see even a still image, and I'll be like, that.
Yeah, my wife and I, we both like still photography, and she's old school, majorly old school. She uses a TLR, like twin lens, you look down the top of it. And she's got like 10 shots when we go out, and I use my digital camera. I've got, 1,000, 2,000 if I want,
Right.
And the idea of not being able to review it immediately just terrifies me. And you've got 10 opportunities to get it right and capture that moment. And then, it might be gone. But that terrifies me. But then you look at the end result, and there, like you say, there is just this organic, like hyper organic quality to film. It's like reality plus. I don't know what it is. It adds so much drama to everything that, it's intoxicating, really, the film side. But the practicality of it, I'm presumably when there is like a crew of people and the huge budgets, like that pressure must be huge when you're shooting on actual film, to get it right. Can you review it quickly, or how does it work on film?
Yeah. There was definitely a phase where, there was video playback. So actually, I think Jerry Lewis, the comedian and filmmaker, developed, as I recall, he was the one to develop video playback. So there was like a little video camera mounted on the film camera that was recording at the same time. So you could review mostly in terms of performance, obviously not in terms of the quality of what you were, but so there was definitely that way to review. And, it's just how things worked. So some people will say that the focus on a film set was so dialed in and everybody understood like the camera's going to roll and it's a finite amount of film. And this is the precious moment in which to capture this moment of the story. Whereas, sometimes with digital, like you'll be rolling and the director will want to say something to the actor and then that becomes a whole conversation, but nobody yelled cut. So now you've got 25 that an editor is going to have to search through where it's like, when did they start acting again? So that's a downside. And you can say like there's less of that kind of zeroed in, full throttle, attentive focus with digital versus when it was film.
Sometimes those restrictions add to the sort of creativity of the process.
Yeah. Well, again, it's like your example with you and your wife and your cameras. It's like you have the freedom to just mess around and play around and say what if and why not and take 75 shots of the same thing. Whereas she's going to have to, is this the picture? Is this the ending? And then, dare to click the button.
It's much more exciting that way, and the whole reveal when the picture comes out, like it's really a lot of fun, but a lot of pressure at the same time. Yeah. What about the cameras themselves? Because presumably they're much more like you work a lot of handheld stuff and you can get probably more, I don't know, but you can get more creative with the camera placement. And I'm thinking of like in Shrinking when you see Jason Segel's head in the sink, and shots like that would have been more challenging with a film camera or something big and chunky from a few years ago.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And, in those shows that I mentioned already, like Transparent and I Love Dick, when there was a lot of handheld or even on Big Little Lies, which was directed by Andrea Arnold. I mean, that was a beautiful kind of tying together of Joey Soloway and I were completely inspired by Andrea Arnold's filmmaking. Ended up, Joey asked Andrea to come and do some episodes of Transparent, and then she shot or directed most of I Love Dick. And then, so I'm been very fortunate to have another incredible collaborator experience. I've learned so much from Andrea. But so on all those projects, having a camera that went from, a larger film camera down to this little kind of digital box did really matter. And it helped the kind of technology disappear a little bit. I mean, obviously I'm still a grown adult in the room with a camera on my shoulder, but I could also hug it against my body, and I would do that like in more intimate scenes, like somehow having it lower and kind of cradled against my bosom, it was like a way to move freely and again, follow the feeling. So yes, in that way, the technology changing and evolving and cameras shrinking down helped a lot. The irony is also that because everything has become wireless over the last decade, now you've got this little box with a lens on it, and then you need the motor and the antennae, the transmitter that goes back to the thing. So pretty soon this little box is surrounded by a ton of technology.
Right.
So it's kind of grown up again. But there are ways, and we've all these very skilled ACs who understand things about the technology of the things that we use that I do not understand. I trust them completely and rely on them. Like they've figured out ways to kind of strip the little thing down again and still have it functioning in all the ways that the production needs it to. But it's this little kind of, back to the little cradle camera.
Do you remember any particular shots that you had to get really creative with to get the camera in there, to get you positioned in a way that could make it happen? Is there anything that comes to mind there?
There were times on, like there was a episode in Transparent at the beginning of season 2 where one of the characters is getting married and she's having, like the ceremony happens, but during the reception, she starts having this panic attack, like I've made the wrong decision, and she wants to figure out if she can still get out of it because the certificate or whatever, the marriage license hasn't been sent off yet. And so she's kind of weaving through this reception hall with 150 guests and her mother's, kind of clawing at her, like, when are you going to cut the cake? And, all the traditional stuff. And she's having this panic attack and trying to, find somebody to go talk to. And what we were able to do is we knew where there was going to begin and where the character was going to exit the room, but the path to that and who might encounter her along the way was left to a bit to chance. And so, that was a time when, even though I had camera operators, like, and Joey would often, say to me, or sometimes Andrew Arnold would say to me, like, will you do this shot? Will you operate this shot? And so in that case, and then that wedding reception crowded room, like, we just had this, we called it like a improvised oneers, highly choreographed improvised oneers was the, this acronym that Joey came up with, HICO. Anyway, and I would just kind of follow the actress and see what happened. So in that case, it was definitely the benefit of, talking about like in the old way, like that would have been basically impossible to do because the focus puller wouldn't have been able to fit where I needed to squeeze between people or, through a doorway or whatever. So the technology allowed us to do that. The ability to do long takes with those cameras allowed us. Having the focus puller remotely on a monitor helped. And then, the trust that we had built as a company of players allowed us to pull that kind of stuff off.
All right. So when we're getting close to wrapping up here, I've got 2 more questions.
Good.
Firstly, what is something you wish other people on the crew knew about what you do that would help you do your job better? Is there anything that springs to mind there that people don't know or people make assumptions about?
Yeah. So I will say first that I'm a fairly mellow person. I get excited, I get passionate, but I'm not a screamer. I don't yell, I don't get upset. I tell my crew, like, if I get quiet, then probably something's up and you should come and say, hey, Jim, what's going on? But I'm not, barking at anybody ever. But one thing that I wish that more crew knew, because oftentimes like the lighting crew will set up the scene and then they go off and, can look at their phone or get a snack or have a smoke or whatever. As a DP, this is almost even, I think maybe it's even more than a director, but like from the minute I show up on set to the minute I go home, I am in full throttle because I'm not only like overseeing the lighting and making sure things are happening as we set up, first it's the rehearsal, right? So then my brain is filling up with like, okay, these are all the shots that we need to get. And, there's support. I'm not alone in this. It's like, I can talk to the script supervisor about the order of shooting, or the assistant director particularly is like, we're managing the schedule together. Like, where do you want to start? What are we going to start with? We're going to start from this angle or on this character, or we want to start with her instead of him. But my point is, like, from minute 1 until wrap, it's just this nonstop symphony of ideas and pressures, and like my brain is on fire in a beautiful way. Like, I love that part.
Yeah.
It's nonstop. And so there are some times when, and nobody's ever like trying to be a pain in the butt or, distracting me exactly, but it's just like, sometimes I don't know that other crew know like how much energy I am expending in the service of the day of filming, if that makes sense. Yeah. And so, sometimes like, I'll try and think of a concrete example, but it's basically like, let's say we really wanted this piece of equipment for 2 days from now, and this person keeps wanting to come and talk to me about it. And I want to be planning ahead with that person, but it's also like, this is a major scene. Like, this is an emotional scene. I have to be totally present right here. I'm glad you're thinking about it. I cannot have this conversation with you about it like right now.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's one thing I would want.
That's great. I really am envisioning this as something that everyone on a crew, whatever their position, would get something out of learning something from another area of this world, and that's what I really hope to happen. So, yeah, that's fascinating. And finally, I'd like to talk about sort of the tech advances that are sort of racing up now. Things like, obviously, AI is the buzzword right now, but particularly in your world, these huge, what do they call them, volume displays, like on The Mandalorian when they had those big screens and things like that. What are your thoughts on that and virtual reality, etc.? What are your thoughts on these new developments? Are you excited? Does it make you nervous? What are you thinking about these things?
I've only had a little sampler taste of that world thus far, and most of that has come in the form of doing, instead of driving in actors in a car that we're towing and out on the streets of LA or New York or whatever, we're shooting with these projection screens. Like, it's not quite as, high tech as the volume, but they're getting there. I mean, they use the same principles and some of the same tools to give you that. But like, you surround the car with these huge panels that are from the right perspective of a car moving through space. And the benefit of it is that it's a lot more time efficient to film as opposed to driving in real life. I think you could almost guess based on most of the things I've said during our conversation here that I prefer the real life version. There's something about like driving at night, just the way that lights will move past the car and fall across an actor's face that you can't plan. If you have the resources and the time, there are people who do that brilliantly when they're controlling the lighting, even if the car's not really driving, or even if it's driving on a street, but they've created all the lighting. But again, those kind of happy accidents. And I still, as a viewer, I feel like I can feel the difference. Like I can witness something that's done with VFX, whether it's a volume or just incredible, VFX characters or monsters or whatever. I can marvel at them and actually really be stunned by the ingenuity. I can think of like Pixar movies that blow me away. They're the most, they're so beautiful. But as far as where I would lean, I'm still the guy who wants to be in a real house or in a real neighborhood where the colors and the textures and the things that you wouldn't necessarily think of exist already and can bring something to life in a beautiful way, as opposed to something that is manufactured.
Yeah.
I'm always happy to be in a real place with a camera.
Yeah. Well, perfect way to end it, I think. So
right.
Thank you so much for joining me today. That was fascinating. Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Soundstage Insider podcast. Many thanks, of course, to our guest, Jim Frohna. You can connect with us on social media. We're Soundstage In on Twitter and Soundstage Insider on Instagram. So that's it for today. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.